Booyaka Shell, welcome back to another episode. If your boy G Swizz, although I am lonely right now, the Micah Ma'a will be joining me, and the Andrea Becker will be joining me. She is the team psychologist for USA Volleyball, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have her on. But before we get into that, I just want to give a quick shout out to Manscaped and their Performance Package 4.0 and their ball toner and their Lawnmower 4.0. Just remember, guys, come on now. We've been through the building times. I mean, we can do this all day. Again, what's the promo code? Volleyballs, all cap, no cap, for 20% off free shipping. And Dr. Price electrolytes. Add some 20 for 20% off because I just took a bunch of Dr. Price electrolytes. So I'm fired up for this energy. I'm fired up for this podcast. whatever, man. The Andrea Becker.
You can handle the heat. Yeah. You can handle the heat.
We're joined now here by professor and sports psychologist, you would call yourself. Yeah, Andrea?
Sure, you can call me that. You know, there's a lot of discrepancy over the term sports psychologist or mental performance coach, or there's people call them a lot of different things. So I would just say that I basically coach more of the mental side of the game. How's that?
Right. That's perfect. I think, first off, I'd like to apologize because when we were reading your bio, that's a very, very simplified bio that I just gave you. Because when we were reading it, we were like, I could spend 5 minutes on this. It's very impressive, and we're very, very lucky to have you on. So again, thank you so much for hopping on here. Sure. I guess the first thing, we've always tried to get different kinds of minds on this show and different kinds of feedback in terms of whether it's for ourselves or it's for our listeners out there. Just curiosity, with COVID and all, I know that a lot of people have gone through like a lot of mental things kind of happening. I was wondering if you've noticed that there's been more stuff that they don't normally have to deal with that you've had to kind of work with or kind of learn about yourself and how to kind of teach, if you can kind of go into that for a second.
Yeah, you know, I think the situation with COVID has influenced people's lives in much different ways.
Right.
And so there are some people where it created a situation where it was helpful to their lifestyle. Maybe they didn't have to commute somewhere. Maybe they didn't have to go to work and they were happy to be at home. And for some people, it could be very isolating. And they might feel like they're really missing out on all of the activities that they're used to doing in their normal daily lives. So it really runs the gamut in terms of how the situation has affected different people. And the same is true for athletes. Would I say that it has increased, issues with mental health? Perhaps. But I think what it has done even more so than that is just simply illuminate that people are already dealing with issues of mental health. And that athletes are more than just athletes, and they have a lot of other things going on in their lives that most of the general public or their fans aren't aware of. And so they're just expecting a certain level of performance. And when the performance is not there, they're solely judging them on the outcome of their behaviors rather than all of the things, because they don't see it, that go into that performance and all those sacrifices they make. And particularly in the sport of volleyball, for example, where the large majority of our professional athletes play and perform the large majority of their lives overseas or in a country where they don't know the language and they don't have the support of their friends and family. And they maybe don't make a salary that you would make if you were in another professional sport like Major League Baseball or NFL football player or NBA basketball player. So I think if anything, it's illuminated that our mental well-being is important and that we should address that in whatever ways that we can to help ourselves have the most healthy lifestyle that we can.
I think you touched on it a little bit with specific things about what makes the volleyball lifestyle a little bit more difficult than other ones. What are some mental health things or psychological things that stand out to you from volleyball than other sports, and things that you run into more in volleyball than other sports, or specific challenges to volleyball that make it kind of what it is?
Mm-hmm. It's funny you should ask that, because if I were to take all of the meetings I have with athletes from all different sports, it typically comes down to a lot of the same issues, to be honest. we tend to evaluate ourselves on our outcomes versus our efforts and our attitudes, that the process that goes into achieving those outcomes. And so instead of focusing on the effort you put forth toward a serve or the focus you had toward the serve, people are evaluating the outcome of the serve itself. And so sometimes a matter of inches could influence the way that a volleyball player feels about themselves. For example, the ball went just 1 inch out, and they missed, and now they feel bad about themselves, versus 1 inch in the court and they got an ace and now they feel great about themselves. And so are you really going to evaluate yourself as being good or not good based on a couple of inches? And sometimes those inches are up to chance. And so really so that's one thing I find, that athletes are evaluating themselves on their outcomes instead of their focus, their effort, the things that are within their control. And that's very common. The other thing that athletes are doing is comparing themselves to others, or worrying about maybe what others are thinking about them. And so, maybe their coach overseas has a different cultural style, and if you make a mistake, you're ripped out. So now every time that coach gets near you, you're starting to think about what that coach is thinking rather than focusing on the task at hand. And so it creates a split focus when we're worried about what other people are thinking about ourselves. Athletes would deal with that all the time. Now, these are more performance psychological issues that I'm addressing. But I think that athletes also deal with family issues. They deal with fatigue. I think, they deal with social issues, cultural issues. And so I could go down the list. Managing expectations is another big one. What type of expectations do you have going into a match? Or what type of expectations do you have going into a new club, whether it's living arrangements or what this experience is going to be like, what the coaching is going to be like. And then when those expectations aren't met, how does the athlete or the individual respond to that? This is such a large issue, but yeah, I would just say that, volleyball players themselves, or the sport, isn't that unique to any of the sports, in that all athletes and young people and all people are dealing with similar psychological challenges. Maybe it's financial as well, So I think what's important is that if you're in a new space or you're in a new environment, that first you make the environment as good as possible. So if you're in another country and you're playing overseas, do you have an apartment or a place to live that's uplifting? Do you like your space? Are the people who are in your space with you positive contributors to your daily life, or do they weigh you down? And I think those are the things that everyone needs to evaluate. And sometimes it's hard, because sometimes it could be a family member and it's hard to maybe cause that separation. Yes, influence the space and separation when you obviously love or care about the person.
That's interesting you say that, to wrap it up, because I think I told you, Gage, that. Did I not? Dude, just make sure your space. I think when you went overseas, I think he's like, what's your advice? Crucial. I'm like, dude, my one advice is just make sure your space is good, because you spend so much time alone there. That can make or break. A lot of your time is just spent alone in your apartment. And if you like it and it puts you in a good place, then that's 70% of your time overseas.
100%.
Yeah, and you brought up something else. Most people are pretty good and in a pretty good positive mental state when their focus is on others. When they're doing things for others, when they're engaging in what I would consider acts of gratitude, where you're doing things that you don't expect anything in return. Those are the things that make us feel good as human beings in general. When we feel at our worst, if most people reflect, it's times when they're by themselves and the focus is inward. Yeah. And I always say self-focus is the worst or self-counsel is the worst counsel we can do for ourselves. It's much better to talk to a stranger, get it off your chest, and then go refocus on doing something positive for other people. And what we know from research on happiness in general is that happiness does not come from enjoyable moments where we're playing in a match or going to a movie or playing video games or enjoying a meal with friends. Because those moments, acts of enjoyment or experiences of enjoyment, are fleeting. It's only enjoyable while you're in the moment. when you engage in acts of gratitude, maybe you go and deliver meals to people who can't get out of their home during COVID, or, just engaging in something where you're giving to others, and the feeling that you get from the moment of doing it sticks with you over a long period of time. And so you can feel better about yourself. And really that's, a lot of the research suggests that that's where true happiness really comes from. It's about the focus on others and giving and engaging in acts of gratitude. And so I think that's, another something that people could do when they feel isolated, is then to go do something where you are giving to others.
That's so important, because I think when it came for me, when I first got over here, I played in Bulgaria. It's my first year out of college and everything. So going from California to Hawaii to Bulgaria was an insane culture shock, and all that you hit the nail on the head for a lot of those things. But and I think by doing acts of gratitude, whether it's just listening to a friend or just kind of talking them through kind of stuff, because a lot of time you're going through the same kind of stuff a lot of time, or maybe it's not, but it also just, you realize that there's a bigger picture to things. You realize, first of all, you learn so much more about yourself, and it's the worst times when you have the worst practices or continuously worse practices, and you said, you kind of self-talk to yourself, or I'd just be on the couch and be like, what did I just do? And then you hear from your teammates, and they get really, really, and it brings them to a dark place at times. And then one thing that you kind of learn to do, like you said, relax, take something off it, and you need to have. My brother, who's not able to be on this podcast, he used to be all volleyball centric, his whole life revolved, and that's completely okay. But you need to have a few other things outside of volleyball, whether it's family, whether it's, like I said, anything else, or helping strangers or helping anyone. Sure. And he didn't have that. So when things weren't going well, and I was the same way, when things weren't going well, your whole world's not going well. So there's nothing to kind of bring you back and to kind of calm down. I think for our listeners out there, that's super important, that realize, okay, you have your obsession, you have this, but you need outlets. And I think that's so important too, especially overseas life. And I know we find weird things about ourselves, and I'm sure, Micah, you found some weird stuff to kind of deal with yourself, or just kind of hobbies or whatever. And that's what I found was most important to me.
The other thing too, Gage, sorry for hopping in here, but you said when I have a really bad practice, then these things are important to me. And I would follow that up with what makes a really bad practice. And I'm going to go ahead and answer my own question.
Right.
And the answer is, if you had a bad attitude or less than 100% effort. Otherwise, whether you see improvement or not, or whether you get the outcome you want or not, you were still refining the parameters of your abilities. Right. Sometimes progress is not visible. Yeah. And so because we spend so much time evaluating ourselves on our outcomes, we're really hard on ourselves, and we do these self-punishment behaviors when we don't get the outcomes. Whether it's not, I've had athletes who don't drink water during games. They don't let themselves sleep. They don't let themselves have a meal. They don't get post-game treatment if they don't feel like they've performed well. And, I think about myself, my primary job is that I'm a professor, and I'm going to go into a class of, 125 students and give a lecture. And maybe over the course of that lecture, I talk about 35 slides, and 2 of the slides are going to be really boring. And after the lecture, I go, during those 2 slides, I could have made it more interesting if I would have done this or would have said that. And but I didn't. So should I not now go eat lunch? Should I punish myself for the poor? When you take it and you put it in a different context, it's almost funny. But as athletes, because we're evaluated day in and day out by our outcomes, it's so easy to fall into that mental pattern of self-punishment, because as humans, we think we have to be punished in order to free ourselves to be successful and move forward. And we really don't. That's really not the purpose of sport performance. Wasn't to punish people when they performed poorly. The purpose of sport performance initially was that so people were physically active, they were engaging in play, and they were developing great character skills. And so how we've taken it and gotten to this point where if you don't get an outcome, you're punished. And I would say that for volleyball players who play in other countries, we tend to enter cultures where that's the only thing that's important. It's almost like they don't even want to talk to you if you had what they consider they don't care about your effort or your attitude. You either got the outcome or you didn't, and you're on the court or you're on the bench, or, and so I think that's another thing that volleyball players battle that's really difficult. How do you have a more effort focused mentality when you're in a culture that's very outcome focused? And I think it's really difficult. And I think that's something that all athletes need to work on.
What is the, because when you mentioned that story about, say you have 35 slides, what is that psychological, I guess, I don't even know how to describe it. Is there a term for the fact that you focused on, there's 35 slides, you did 33 good ones, and then you focus on the 2? Because like as a setter or a libero will pass 25 balls in a game and get ace twice and very rarely think about the 23 good ones, but like just be like thinking about those 2 bad ones. And as a setter, the same. Like I set 100 balls and then I missed 3, and like as I'm setting the next 10 balls after I miss one, I'm thinking about the one I missed. Is there like like we focus on the bad so much?
Yes. I think that's just a case of good old fashioned perfectionism, right? And it's gotten most athletes to be successful to a certain degree. And then at what point, the question is, at what point does perfectionism take away from your success? And that's when it takes away from your success, when you're carrying, the emotion from 10 sets ago into your present set. So if you're still hanging on to what happened in the past, then you're not really focused on the present moment in the present set that you're setting. And I think it's just human nature it's easy to see what didn't go well when there's 60 great sets and only 3 bad ones. They stand out. It's easier to see those things. Just like it's easy for people to focus on negativity. They could focus on all these positive things that are going on in their life, but here are the 2 negative things. That's easy to see. And I also think in sports, we're trained as athletes to, it's very rare as we go up the levels from youth sport to high school to collegiate to professional, that you perform in a game or in a match, and then you did something very unique that was successful. How often do you go back and practice and have a coach reinforce that behavior? Reinforce like, wow, Micah, the ball was, really tight to the net, and he got up and he positioned himself like this. Let's take the setters and let's try to practice something that went really well. We'd never do that. It was like, it went really well, so we move on, but we focus on these things that don't go really well. And I think to a degree, some combination of both is a lot more healthy than just practicing the things that we don't do well, so.
Do you think, this is a unique question, but if they stand out also because they are unique and more rare, for example, like your life is going really well and then like something bad happens and that will stand out. Do you think the opposite happens? Like if your life, nothing is going well and then like something good happens, you tend to become more optimistic and like see the good. Or if I set 100 bad sets and I set 3 good ones, am I now focusing on the good ones because they're more rare? Or
yes,
does that
because,
not get switched like that?
What you're speaking to right now is more of a learner mindset. And it has to do with learning, and it has to do with expectations. Okay. So if someone's brand new at learning setting, there's 0 expectations. So they could set 100 bad ones and they don't feel bad about themselves because they don't expect to do well.
Right.
But when they set a couple good ones, wow, it really stayed out. It felt like it popped off my hands. It felt good. I mean, to be honest with you, that's how I feel when I try to set. I still can't get it down. It's like, it's never soft. It never looks as smooth as a true setter. I just can't do it. Right. And so I'm constantly working on it. And the few times I feel that feeling where it comes off good, it feels amazing. And then it stands out to me. And that's what we would consider a learner's mindset. Once we become proficient at a skill, we give that up and we develop these expectations that we should perform it perfectly every single time, or perform it to a certain standard of excellence every single time, which is just not realistic really in any sport, because every sport and every skill has a probability at which we will perform it well. And so to hold ourselves to a standard of perfect and have the expectation that we should perform it well every single time, 100% of the time, is unrealistic. And then we hold ourselves to that. Then we judge ourselves and punish ourselves and critique ourselves when we don't get it for that sliver of time, which is really not a functional mindset.
Well, it's funny also because I think, like you said, it doesn't, if you don't get good at it and put a lot of work in it, it doesn't become a part of your identity. And then your identity doesn't get challenged by your performance of how well or how poorly you do it because you haven't put a lot of effort into perfecting it. But then, so it's kind of like it takes courage to try and perfect something because if you don't do it well, that's a reflection of like, dude, you've practiced like 1,000 hours at this. So like you've actually tried to do it well and you're not doing it. This is
that
why
can be
sometimes
crushing.
Why sometimes
So
I'm
crushing.
like I purposely don't try and practice like hobbies or things that I do for fun or like that I do pretty well, but for someone that doesn't do it all the time, so that I can keep this like sense of like I'm pretty good at it for not really trying. You know? Do you think that at all can be translated into volleyball, or that it's just the nature of the beast that you have to have some sort of, I guess, what is the phrase that I'm saying? You have to have something in it that you're going to lose, but to be good enough at something.
Well, you made me think of two things as you were talking. And the first thing is walking is a skill, and we all walk every single day and practice walking, but we still all trip. We just do. We occasionally trip. So, I mean, we do way more than they say 10,000 hour rule for, expert sport performance, whether you agree or disagree, it doesn't really matter. They just say once you become proficient in something, it doesn't mean you're going to do it perfect all the time. We've done way more than 10,000 hours of walking and we're still going to trip occasionally. So that was my first thought. My second thought is how you perform and the things that you do should not be your identity. That's just something you do. And I think that's another thing that athletes need to separate themselves from. I mean, Gage talked about that, about when you only have volleyball and that's your primary focus and how you identify yourself as a person, then you're going to feel good when the performance of volleyball is good. You're going to feel good enough as a human or not good enough. And I think all athletes should redefine themselves based on their core qualities, not what they do in sport, not what they do in their job, not what they do in their hobbies. Those are just behaviors that you do, whether they're enjoyable or because you have to do it for your livelihood. But who are you as a person? Are you a kind person? Are you a giving person? Are you, a grounded person? And what are the qualities that actually make you who you are, and separate that out from your performance in your sport or your performance in your job or, whatever else it is that people are really invested in.
Do you find that as the times are changing and like things such as like social media, Instagram, all of that kind of things are becoming a lot more prominent in people's lives, that people's values aren't necessarily what they put first in a sense of like their identity, but also in their priorities? And how has the environment of sports changed because of social media and those kinds of things popping up, and how does that affect, I guess, sports psychologists?
I would say that starting at a very young age, social media makes it a lot easier for young people to evaluate their sense of worth based on what they perceive others' worth to be, as opposed to, 20. When I was a kid growing up, we came home after school and we ran outside and played catch and rode bikes. I couldn't go home after school and see what other people were doing, or if they were earning trophies or getting the latest, advancement in technology in their home, or, and so I think the social media makes it a lot easier to engage in social comparison, and then to evaluate yourself and your own worth based on what you think other people's worth are. Unfortunately, most people only post positive things on social media. You don't see, a post that says, my mental state was very depressed today. No, not very many people are posting that. While people are talking about it more, they're not posting that. they're posting the night before when they won a championship. They're not talking about the letdown. They're not talking about the isolation. They're not talking about the other things that they might be experiencing. So I think that it increases social comparison. I also think it increases the feeling of being judged by others, particularly when you put something out and then you have, a number of people commenting on it, or based on how many people commented on it, that's, how you determine whether you're good enough or not. Am I good enough because a lot of people responded to the video I put out, or does it mean I'm not good enough? I mean, it's going to be unique to individuals, but what types of conclusions are we drawing based on our interactions in social media? And I think a lot of those are not positive and not helpful to mental health.
Right. I think like that, I kind of had when I was in college, like I had a fairly successful career. And so I was like, top of the food chain. And then when I got overseas, it was like, wait, you compare, it's like, I just started comparing myself, like thinking about how many other liberos that are out there, how many better, there's a rookie, all this other stuff. And just like, it gets you down and you're like, oh, probably my team thinks I suck or something like that. Or it kind of gets like, you start comparing yourself more and more and more. And then you realize like you said, you got to kind of pull yourself back to your roots and who are you? You know what I'm saying? It's like this is not me. Like I've never done this in my life before. And I think if you're wanting to play overseas, you have to either have or develop a strong like mental side of yourself and determine like who you are, or you're gonna learn through some mentally painful ways. But I think that's like super important. When I heard that was like a light bulb in my head, and I was like, yeah, that was definitely something I had to kind of go through myself for sure.
Sure, definitely.
I think also what's interesting about the social media is that, and maybe you can touch on this, how this works, but more people now experience what maybe before like celebrities would experience, because like, I don't know who's a big celebrity for me. Maybe say Elvis Presley or like those kinds of people. They're usually the only people that are in the spotlight or that other people are seeing a lot of. And now I feel like the gap is becoming huge between the amount of people that used to be celebrities, and now I feel like everyone is getting some sort of, there's got to be a term or something, but like celebrity feeling to themselves where you're in the spotlight a lot or just being watched a lot. And so maybe Michael Jordan before was an athlete that would have these kinds of mental, not breakdowns, but like pressures on him. But now kids that are in high school like have 2 million followers playing as a junior or sophomore. How does that, is that like celebrity thing? What can you help me understand how that works and why that is that celebrities are usually not like they're not happy, but they definitely have some things that they're not doing so well about.
Sure.
Like fame is something hard to deal with.
I think when you're good at anything, one of the challenges in continuing to do that thing is maintaining that level of performance, whether it's writing books, right? When you're not good at writing books, writing's not hard. Just down and write, but it's not perfect either. It's not. And so when you're a writer, then that becomes hard to maintain that standard that people have seen.
Right.
When you're an athlete, doing that day in and day out, where you're exposed to the public, where they're watching it, it's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult to go out there and perform at a certain level day in and day out. It doesn't matter what the task is or what the skill is. When you're doing something with complete exposure, where everyone's watching you, it becomes more difficult to maintain that performance, consistently over a period of time, because you have to do it with not caring what they think, with not listening to what they say, not, and that's, the physical part of sports is easy. That's what's almost just ingrained in you, but can you do the physical side of that with these other voices and these other pressures? I think by adding the kids in high school who have 2 million viewers and stuff, there's natural pressure in sport. Like, natural pressure is, it's 23-22 and you go back to serve that, and your team's down by 1. That's natural pressure. Unnatural pressure is people are in the stands and they are chanting and booing at you based on whether that serve goes in or out. That's just, anybody feels that energy. Anybody feels that pressure that's generated by, other humans. And so I don't know. I think that's a really deep topic. How has social media influenced the mental health of young people who are growing up with that being the norm? And I honestly, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It's interesting. I think we'd have to look at the research and read about it. It's just not something I've, delved deep into that.
But you would kind of narrow it down to like, fame can maybe become mentally exhausting because of the constant pressures that they're under.
I think so. I don't know if it's about fame as much as it's about continuing on. Because I think the question that is in the mind is, how long can I do this?
Right.
Can I keep doing this? And then they have another performance and they do it. And when you think of, people like musicians, I think that's why, and you brought up Elvis, but I think that's why you hear stories of musicians who get up for it, right? Whether they take coffee or take some kind of upper, and then it's a total, energy draining experience. Yeah, you're amped up. It requires this level of amping. And then after the performance is over, now I can't get back down. So now I take something that's a downer. And I can't say, because like I said, I don't study this area. But I would imagine that people who do ingest substances to help themselves get amped and then come down is part of maintaining that standard of performance that they don't believe they can achieve day in and day out. They don't know if they can meet the expectations of others. And I think, there are more healthy ways to do that.
Right.
I think
so what would those be? Like, how would you suggest? I know that with the national team, a lot of guys can't sleep after games. And then I'm not sure exactly what they're doing before the game, but what are some healthy suggestions for those kinds of struggles, I guess?
Yeah. I think it's completely normal to come out of a match at late night and then have difficulty going to sleep. The amount of energy that is exerted during a match, it's hard to just come down off of that. And then that's physical energy. And then the mental energy is reviewing what occurred in the game. And maybe a player like you, Micah, you're like, those 3 sets that didn't go as well as you would have liked, keep ruminating in your mind. And so, one of the things that I think is really important is just, and I know everyone already talks about it, but being able to focus on your breath. It's one thing to breathe. We all breathe every day. It's something that we do unconsciously. Our breath is always with us. It doesn't go away. I always say, if you're not breathing, you're either dying or you're choking. And so those are 2 bad things. So breathe. But to be able to be an athlete and lay down and focus on one aspect of the breath, whether it's the rise and fall of the chest, the nose as it goes in through the nose, out through the mouth. If you can actually focus your attention just on the breath, it does 2 things. It quiets the mind and it relaxes the body. And every time you notice your focus drifting back toward those 3 sets that were bothering you, you would say, oh, I recognize I drifted. Now I'm going to go back to my breath. And over a period of time, the body will relax and then you'll fall asleep. It's a nice sleep mechanism, but also it's a nice way to train focus. It's the ability to recognize my mind drifted to somewhere I didn't want it to go and draw it back to where I wanted to focus it. And so I use that as a simple technique to get athletes to train their focus. The other thing too is reading helps. Reading really helps because, not one's phone. Reading one's phone doesn't help because that light is going to keep you awake. But reading, and not something that's so heavy, maybe a novel that's got you interested in the storyline, even if people don't like to read, then if you read 3 or 4 pages, you know, it will change, it will just quiet the mind again. And so I think that's another strategy in terms of preparing for performance. It's about preparing, you know, in a similar, I'm not going to say the same way, because when you traverse time zones and you're in different hotels and you're doing that, you can't do things always in the same way. Like if you like a 2-hour nap, you may not always get to have a 2-hour nap, but you can have checkpoints. I check in and I make sure that between the night before and the day of performance, I get 9 hours of sleep. So that means I tack on a nap to get to the 9, or whether I get the 9 the whole night before, my checkpoint is that I need 9 hours of sleep. So if you got 7 and you need a 2-hour nap, great. Or maybe you got 8.5 and you take a 30-minute nap during the day, or rest your eyes or something like that. Maybe you check in, maybe you drink 1 cup of coffee and that's it. So your checkpoint is 1 cup of coffee, whatever those things are. Maybe it's listening to a certain kind of music. Maybe it's engaging in nature. There's some research on being in green space helps us. So if you're performing in cities where everything's gray and everything's this, then somehow, one checkpoint could be engaging in some form of green space, even if it means you're watching a video on your computer. So just, it's changing the nature and the state that we're in prior to performance and getting yourself to where you need to be each time. So all athletes should have certain checkpoints in terms of meals and sleep and what they're drinking, and and then do they need music? Do they need more socializing or more isolation, and really understanding what you need as an athlete, and then creating a little checklist, doing it every time.
It's so crazy because I feel like sports, or just research and science in general, has changed like sports so much. Like Michael Jordan didn't even a lot of times practice in the off season, and now guys like the day after, like in there, we know like green space helps you. People would never have known that back then. They didn't even know like smoking was bad for you, and we're like over here like we need this. But when is there like a fine line of balance? Because I feel like sometimes I know some individuals where they get very caught up in the science and everything like that, and then it's too much mental, and they're just not like, sometimes the best players, not a lot's going on in their mind. Like they're just like, they're not very smart, and it actually helps them, it benefits them. And then people that are very intelligent their performance might actually not be as high as it could be because they are very intelligent, or like they need this 2-hour nap and they're so diligent, but then they don't get it, and then what happens? And this guy's like, oh, I eat whatever I want anytime, I'm ready to play. Like, you know what I mean? Where do you outweigh the benefits of like having a schedule versus the weaknesses of like thinking too much and being too involved in the science and that kind of stuff?
I think that's why I said checkpoints and not a rigid schedule, because if you can't make a rigid schedule each time, then that might create some anxiety on the part of someone who's an overthinker. I 100% agree with you. Micah, you brought up, intelligent athletes, or what I would say is deep thinkers. I think that deep thinkers are more challenged in their sport than people who are not really, worried about things like that, or aren't really processing things about what anybody thinks or what they ate or how they prepared. And to a degree, it would be great if we could all have that. If we could have that, hey, I'm at this point in time, I don't think anymore, but we don't turn off our thought stream. And as humans, they say that there are, approximately 60,000 thoughts that flow through our minds in a given day, and we don't just turn it off. It's just that some athletes are much deeper in their thinking than others. And I do find that it is more of a challenge. It makes it more of a challenge. You have to get better at your ability to not control those thoughts, because they're going to come and go whether you like it or not. But recognize that when you're in your thoughts, and then reshift your attention to the task that you're performing. And so if you go back to serve and you notice your mind is wandering, oh gosh, don't miss the serve, or I'm going to be taken out if I miss the serve, or, if you go back to pass and you've had a bad pass on the last one, and now you're worried that your team's going to get on you if you have a bad pass on this one. When you recognize the thought, you just have to say, okay, I see you there. And now in order to pass the ball, I really just have to track. I'm going to get out of my head and into my eyes, track the ball. And when I'm going back to serve, I hear you thoughts, don't miss, don't miss, don't miss. I'm just going to dial in my target, relax my muscles, take that breath and get it and really connect and then go for it. It's just about recognizing and then constantly shifting. And if you could get good at that, that's a skill, then you get good at managing all those thoughts that occur while you're performing. Anybody can perform well in the absence of thought. Anyone, right? Because that's what that's call like your flow
state.
That's really what flow is, right? We just described flow. Okay, flow occurs like what, 10% of the time.
Depends on how good. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just putting a number out there because I think it's really small. An athlete who's really mentally tough performs well in the face of adversity with those thoughts going through their head. They're able to focus their attention on the right thing at the wrong time in the absence of confidence. I don't feel confident right now. I don't know if I'll be taken out. I don't, but I'm going to dial my eyes on this ball and I'm going to dime this pass and here we go. Right. And that's really what, to me, mental toughness is all about. And I think that's the hardest thing anybody strives to become in their sport.
Well, when we get overseas, we notice that there's a lot of really good young players that when everything's going great, they are just as good as the top players in the league. And then you realize the only difference is that the top players are playing at that level 99% of the time, and this guy is 25%. And so it's really
very streaky.
Everyone, there's a lot of talent and everyone can play at the same level. It's just about who can do it for longer.
Yeah.
They did it for 25 points and we did it for 20, so they win.
Sure. So you're saying if the physical talent is there, what's shifting is that athlete's mentality and their focus.
And their experience and just understanding.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Which was it was an interesting thought that we had when I was on my team last year, because we were all pretty much 24 and under. And we were like, dude, we can play with these guys. But then it's we're hot and then we're lose by 10 points. And then we destroy them and then we're like, dang, they're just consistent. That's all it is.
I would say that's another thing with a lot of athletes that I deal with, where their mentality and how they feel follows the performance. So if we got the big block, we feel good. Now we go back and serve good. If we dimed a pass, we feel good. Now we crush the ball. When it doesn't go good, then we don't feel good. And then that lends itself to that negative spiral, as opposed to, hey, it wasn't a perfect pass. Just go back to your vision. Just go back to your connection. Just go back to your game plan. Just go back to your, and I really think in the end that instead of allowing your emotions and your mindset to follow your performance, you choose your emotional responses and you choose your mindset, and then you play the probabilities that the performance will follow that. And really, to me, that's consistency.
Right.
That's how you achieve consistency. When you choose not to respond to imperfection, when you choose not to get down on yourself or punish yourself for missed opportunities, when you're choosing a mentality and evaluating yourself each play on, did I have the mentality or not, versus did I get the performance or not? And those are two totally different approaches to sport performance. And I think the ones who could be consistent over a period of time are choosing the mentality and the evaluation of the mentality versus the outcome and the evaluation of the outcome to dictate how they feel and how they think and how they behave on the court.
Me and Joe, Gage's brother, talked about that a little, where I was like, Joe, you know what's interesting is that when it's game point and you roll shot your serve, and then you say you lose or you win, it's actually the mentality that you appreciate, because say it's game point and you just ripped it and you're super aggressive and you miss, you actually just don't care as much because you're happy with the way that you approach the situation. And I think that's kind of what can tie into what you're saying. Like if you go after things with the mentality that you appreciate or respect, whether that's being smart or being aggressive or whatever you put an emphasis on, that takes courage to do.
Sure.
The outcome is just like, you're just like, well, I went after it. Like,
yeah,
I wasn't scared of the moment. I went after it and it didn't work, but I didn't like back down or whatever that answer is.
So you brought up an issue that's very sensitive to me. So the question is, to me, is what matters the most is, was the serve purposeful or was the serve based on fear? So if you roll shotted your final shot and it was based on, you know, serving them short. Yeah. Catch them. If you hit 2 tough serves, you got them on their heels and now you're going to chip one in. That's a purposeful serve.
But that's still an aggressive move.
It's an aggressive
you're doing
move.
Something with aggression or with purpose, like you said.
Yeah. If you've made 2 on one mentality and now you're playing the gambler's fallacy. Hey, I made 2. I'm probably not going to hit another tough serve like that, so I'm just going to chip it in. That is a very fragile mentality. That is a fragile approach to consistently playing at a high level. And it's hard not to do that because it feels safe. It feels more comfortable. But in
it's
the
like
end,
you have your 2 marbles and you're like, I'll keep the 2. You know, it's like, I don't want to gamble anymore. I'll just take it.
I just think if you want to win gold medals, you need that consistent mentality. If you want to win occasional medals, you play safe. But the only way to ever truly maximize and know what you're capable of achieving is to push the envelope to and I'm not saying, when I'm saying push the envelope, I'm not saying be reckless. I'm just saying choose a target and then be aggressive in your mindset, not be purposeful in your mindset, not shift your mindset based on the situation that had occurred previously because it no longer exists.
Right.
What happened in the past only exists in your mind. So each serve or each pass or each whatever should be treated as it's the only one.
See, that's what's so interesting because I've heard
very difficult to do.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've heard that before where everyone's like, Sparrow uses that where it's like rolling a dice. You roll a 6, you roll a 6, you roll a 6. The 4th one, you still have 6 opportunities, and it's like 1/6 of a chance to roll a 6, and the same for serving. But then I've always thought but that's like with dice. Like this is with humans, and humans aren't that way. Like humans, you hit 3 good serves, and it's like the chances you're gonna serve another one are higher than if you missed 3 of your last serves because we're human. We're not a dice. Like we actually are
what
thinking
is the difference?
consciously of making and missing. So that's the only thing I've had against that. Like, because I'm like, it actually does. In a perfect world, you'd want it to not have an impact, but it might. And so how do we, knowing that we're human, adjust that philosophy in a sense where it's like, hey, we know you've missed 5. It's probably not as equal of a chance you're going to just destroy the serve and it's going to go great. So how do we build that confidence again? Or like you do hit 160%, but it's like in a good zone. And then maybe the next one you're feeling a little better. It's like, now we can do something new because we're not machines in the sense, it's like we do have those feelings and emotions, and how do we, with an understanding of them, help our performance, understanding we are human.
Sure. Go ahead, Gage.
No, I was just thinking it's funny how one thing that I've realized about overseas players, especially the older, the veterans of the game, they just realize they're like, today's not my day, but they'll still just keep risking, just keep going after. They're like, today's just not my day, or it's like, but they're still just gonna keep going after, and they're just like, what? But the younger players are like, oh man, what did I just do? And half it's like the coach is gonna get more than the younger players. When the older players just not on, it's just like, it's not happening today. I think that's an awesome attitude, but it has to be earned.
That is an overseas awesome attitude that I've never heard. Where the guy's like, the Italian on our last team would always say, it's not our day. Look at them. They're playing incredible. And I'm like, geez, that's it? Why don't we do something about it? And he's like, I am, but still, it's not our day.
I love it. I love that. Yeah, I mean, Micah, you brought it up. The difference between a rolling a dice and a human is a conscious emotional system.
Right.
But I think that gets back to my point. What you're describing is a conscious emotional system that is reflecting on what previously occurred and now making a decision. What I'm proposing is a conscious emotional system that doesn't care what previously occurred and is choosing a consistent mindset as the approach to every serve.
Totally.
Is that hard to do? Absolutely.
That's what I mean, I totally get I've always understood the premise. I was just like, if we are in a position or somebody doesn't have the capacity at the time to overcome those thoughts and emotions, we then have to switch our mindset to like, okay, how are we going to like play knowing we do have these emotions and we don't have the capacity to overcome them? And like, the people that can manage those situations are also better off as well. Because they are just more aware of like, I'm not playing good. Okay, help me out and like give me a good ball so I can feel good about myself. Even though I know that's not what I should be doing, I need it. Sure. And then it's like, okay, well, at least if you can admit you need it, we can do something about it and maybe get you out of your situation.
Mm-hmm.
Some days it's just like, the thing with dice is like there's always gonna be 1 through 6, but I don't know. Just some days, or it's like no matter what your like mental, like for example, it's just gonna hit. It's just some days I just go and serve and pass, and it just hits the weirdest parts of my platform. And I can be the most calm, collected, confident guy out there, but then just some days it's just not gonna work. So that's why when it comes like with serving, like I understand like maybe like tapering off some stuff, and I mean, but then again, like you said, that's still going. Would you say that's more? I mean, we wouldn't say aggressive. Would we say it's more strategic or fear-based? You know what I'm saying? If it's like...
Right.
It was
that's a good question.
Like, I think a strategic serve is still a forward mindset. So let's say you are having what you would consider a poor serving day where you're not getting the outcome. And let's say you're focused there. Because my first response is, well, where is your focus? Are you having a poor serving day because you're physically fatigued or you're physically have something physically wrong, or is your focus not in the right spot at the right time? And my argument is that it's typically a focus issue. Yeah. It's sometimes a fatigue issue. So maybe you're not getting, the same, you're not jumping, maybe you're off by a couple, centimeters or something like that. But when people are having off serving, typically it's because they're thinking too much, and whatever those thoughts may be, I mean, could be run the gamut from who's in the stands to what the coaches think on the bench to what my teammates are thinking to the score to any kind of situational issues. Maybe something that happened completely off the court. They're typically in what I would call split focus, one eye on the court and one eye on whatever is going on in their head. And so I lost my thought what I was going to get at, but so let's just say you're having that poor performance. Then the question I would ask myself as an athlete, if I wanted to be successful, would not to be to do a serve I never or I rarely practice.
That's true.
Like, hey, I'm not feeling good, so let me roll shot this in. I mean, what percentage of the practice serves are roll shots? Now, if that's a strategic shot that you serve in practice 50% of the time, even 25% of the time, and that's what you feel like is your highest probability serve, then you commit to that serve and you go hit it. But what I see players doing is they don't hit that serve in practice. And then they revert to what they consider is a safe serve, and the safe serve ends up not being safe because they're concerned about missing. Their muscles are tighter, and now they're holding off, and now all of a sudden this roll shot goes out of bounds, or this roll shot hits into the net, or this roll shot. What I thought was safe really wasn't safe at all. And what would have been safe was, hey, my highest probability serve is from 1-1 when I really am dialed in with my focus. So I'm just going to do my routine, dial my eyes on 1 because I'm giving myself the length of the court. So I'm giving myself maybe the largest area. So I'm giving myself the widest variability of air should I air. But I'm going to now that I've decided and committed to the serve, I'm just going to see my target and trust my physical self to execute what I've decided to do. I think indecision and fear get in the way of committing to the serve and then executing it in a way that's more natural and more free without the, I'm not trying to take something off of it. I use this analogy a lot, but when you're shooting a basketball and you move closer to the basket or further away from the basket, you don't think about how much force and trajectory you're putting on the ball. It's not how it's created. That's not how the human body creates it. You lock your eyes on the rim, and whether you're further away or closer, your mind calibrates force, trajectory, touch, and so forth, and you're able to make those adjustments. So same thing is true in volleyball. You lock your eyes on the target where you want to hit it, and then you trust that your body's going to make those force and trajectory adjustments based on how far you are away from that target. And you all serve so much. Everyone's capable of hitting a serve. Now it's just what gets in the way of that mentally.
Would it be productive to create that roll shot as a, I guess, break the glass in case of emergency kind of thing? Does that make sense? Like if that person hasn't practiced it, that makes sense. But what if they actually are like any smart thing, if you're a Marine, you're like, what's our backup plan? Or like if you got a second parachute, like why would we not go into a match with like, dude, I am not hitting my hard one. I've actually practiced this other one.
I fundamentally agree with you. And that is what I consider a float serve. And the reason why I consider a float serve, it's a highly effective serve that's less complex. So when you reduce the complexity of a physical motion, it increases the probability that you'll perform it well. And so with a float serve, the ball's in front of you the whole time, the court's in front of you the whole time. You're not jumping and extending up here and then hitting something over there. And so I think developing a really great float serve as a high probability serve when you want to get the ball in the court, but hitting the float with, with
less
movement.
Speed goes a longer way with the float.
Yeah. And I don't think you have to hit a float with pace for it to be effective. I think you have to hit a float with movement. And that has to do with, solid, nice contact and then really targeting. I mean, then the target becomes even more important. Like where I'm trying to hit a seam, I'm trying to hit, the 2 seam or the 3 seam. So again, giving yourself the largest court space for whatever serve you choose to go with. But yeah, developing different serves is important for sure. And then when you get into a situation where you don't feel as good, you commit to your highest probability serve. And for some people, their highest probability serve is, 1-to-1 or, 1 to the 2 seam. And I'm just gonna go back and do what I do every single time I go back. And I'm just going to do that consistently and focus my eyes and go for it. But for some people, maybe I don't even want to call it a roll shot. I would develop a cut shot if I thought that was an effective serve. And then in practice, I would evaluate which serve do I hit for the highest probability. And if the cut shot is the serve I hit at the highest probability, I'd use it. And if the float serve is the highest probability, I'd use it. And if just, my traditional jump serve is highest probability. And then the second question is, okay, this is my highest probability serve to what location? Down the line, probably a lower probability because now you got the sideline to air in and out. I mean, it's a little bit of a science, but it's unique to each individual. And so it's about going to practice and understanding what your capabilities are and where your strengths are, and then having your strength to fall back on versus a serve that you don't do in practice. And you don't, until you get into a situation where I'm going to hit this comfort serve, and now you hit the comfort serve into the net. And that's what we found in our research. If you look at a team like Brazil, for example, their national team, when they get behind by a large margin, they go back to the service line and pound serves. It's almost like, hey, freedom to totally mess up and freedom just to go back and crush it. Because in their mind, this set is lost. And they go back and they crush it. I mean, to me, it seems like 8 times out of 10, they serve their way right back into that match. And next thing you know, they're winning that set, right? Because it's what happened is
freeing. It's freedom.
They freed themselves.
Like. Yeah.
They freed themselves. But what if you could just have that mindset and that freedom? I mean, so what it tells you is they're capable of serving that way, regardless of the score. That's how they're capable of serving. So, and then what it does is it transfers the pressure. Now it transferred the pressure to the passers. And now they got a couple of bad passes. And now it takes the setter out of rhythm and the hitters are out of rhythm. Yeah, you've taken a team that felt very comfortable and very confident, and you've put pressure on them now, and now they're out of rhythm, and now they're thinking, and now all of a sudden you're feeling good about yourself. It's like now, and that's really the definition of momentum. Momentum really is psychological, because your focus and your effort changed. Your one focus and effort went from, hey, we're not performing well, let's just go after them. And now they're focusing on the task at hand, and the receiving team is all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, they're having a tight moment. Like, wow, they're really serving bombs, and now we're out of rhythm. And now someone's going back to serve, and they're worried about the score, and they're worried about all these other things, as opposed to just, again, allowing the mentality to drive the performance rather than the outcome to drive the mentality. Because I would be curious how Brazil would do, and maybe they wouldn't do well, but if they serve like that all the time. And a few other teams do it too. You see it in, I think the Serbian team does it. I think they just go back there and blast serves when they're behind. I mean, I think the Italian team does it. I could be wrong. Maybe that's just my own external observation, but I do think we see that a lot.
I think what's like interesting about my little experience with the USA team, and then with like a lot of people from all over the world outside of that, is I guess that aspect of like humanness. And like I feel like the USA team's it's probably the most calculated, like psychological, like the other guys are just emotional, and they don't, it's like it's their sword, it's a double-edged sword. Like they understand that they're emotional, and then like it carries them and it doesn't, and then they'll like go off at each other and then like be the best friends. And I'm just like, it's part of it's refreshing, because you're like, oh wow, like this is very human. Like we're not robots in a sense, but it also can be the opposite, where you're like, dude, we need to get it together. Like just like start being normal. But that's what stands out to me about that story, is that like Brazil can serve that way maybe all the time, but it's like that freedom is the human aspect of their game, or like of the situation, that it's like it just happens. And that's just what makes volleyball like something you can't predict, is the human aspect of it as well.
Sure. So. I agree with you. I think that when you allow the emotional system to dictate, the highs are high and the lows are low.
You're definitely on a roller coaster.
And they just keep on coming, right?
Yeah, totally.
And I think that's one way to approach it. And I think a lot of teams, and I think we've all been on teams that have that. You're riding the emotional roller coaster of the season. But I think if you want to consistently perform at a high level, consistently, and maybe at this level you're still having peaks and valleys, but you're kind of right, because you are human, you're never going to be perfect. It's never, you are going to be affected, but then it's about recognizing it as quickly as possible to get back, right. And I think sure, riding the high, when you're flowing, then just flow.
Yeah. But
when you're not flowing, it's nice to have things to go back to that I think these other teams don't necessarily. I think they just ride the low.
Totally. But like I don't get how I guess they're just also very good volleyball players.
Different culture too.
At the end of the day, they're just like,
sure.
You're like, how is this team like? They're like firecrackers, but they're also just extremely good at volleyball. Also, we don't mean to take too much of your time. We can wrap things up, Gage. I just looked and it's been an hour.
No. I just want to say, well, Andrea, there's a reason why you're definitely Team USA sports psychologist. It's because you definitely done research.
Mental coach.
Right? Yeah. Sorry, there's a lot of titles that we could have listed there, and we just want to thank you so much for hopping on the pod, and we wish you best of luck this summer.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Andrea.
Wish you the best of luck as well.
Really, thanks a lot.
Yeah, I hope to see you both in the gym. Sometime soon.
No, us too.
You know, when we have guests on this podcast, I usually put them into about two categories. One is the one where we're joking around, we're laughing, usually a good friend of ours. Or two, the ones where you shut up and you listen to them because they have a lot of information and you just try to absorb as much as possible from that person. And Andrea Becker is one of those people. Like, I love the guests where we have you just say like such a simple, broad question, but they bring so much more information and light to it where you just are just like sitting there just listening for a certain amount of time. And I think, yeah, I mean, after those, like if those wondering out there what it's like interviewing someone like that, it's just like afterwards just makes you kind of think about a lot of things. And personally, we do bring into practice like that kind of way of thinking. And like the stuff she touched upon, something that I'll be bringing into practice as well. And I've said this a billion times. Again, this podcast is definitely for our audience out there, but a lot of times for us, we ask personal questions on here. And we just take you on a ride. But like she said, she talked a lot about routines. And let's get in routines here with Manscaped. Use a promo code Volleyballs, all cap, no cap. It's a new year. Maybe a new little routine. Maybe it can be your pre-volleyball routine. It can be your pre-match routine. The Lawnmower 4.0 and the Performance Package 4.0. Use a promo code Volleyballs, all cap, no cap. And then as well as Dr. Price's. What other pre-match or during the match drink would you rather go to with the little Dr. Price's vitamins? Again, use the promo code Addison20 for 20% off. And just remember, if you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen. This has been another episode presented by Addison.